Hi, this is Craig Danuloff from the Privacy Co., and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 247 for November 22nd, 2021, right before Thanksgiving here in the United States. So for those of you celebrating, happy Thanksgiving. And if you're looking to be extra generous this Thanksgiving, you can do a couple things. First of all, help your friends and family become more private and secure. We're going to talk again today. We talked a little bit last week when we talked about the best and worst gift guide. We're going to talk about some more of that today. And keep in mind as we're talking about privacy issues and things you can do to improve your privacy and security, not just for yourself. Think about your loved ones too, especially if you spend time with them over Thanksgiving or the other holidays coming up here soon. That's a great time to help people, kind of improve their own situation, especially if you've already got yourself covered, then help others. And of course, something else you can do is you can donate money to some of the great charities that are doing good work for security and privacy for all of us. And if you just go to my blog, firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, and search on thanks or Thanksgiving, you'll find an article where I talk about several of my top choices and some other ones you might look at to give some money to some people who are fighting the good fight every day. So as you may have surmised by the input tagline, we've got an interview today with Craig Danuloff from Priiv. And that, you may recall, is the app that I said was really cool that I checked out last week, and I added as a kind of a special note for the best and worst gift guide. And since then, I've played with it a little bit more, and I still need to spend some more time with it, but it really is cool. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking specifically about that app today in the interview because, I don't like to do infomercials, but it's directly tied to a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And that's why I invited Craig to come on the show. Is because it is hard. There's just a lot of things, and a lot of them are easy. A lot of them are quick and simple, in and of themselves. But when you kind of add them all up, it just looks really daunting, and it just takes time. And it's not that you can't do it. And I recommend that you don't get overwhelmed. That if you want to do it on your own, you certainly can. And you just need to kind of, get the checklist and walk through it and check them off as you go. But there are some tools, thankfully, today, and Priiv is one of them, that will kind of help you accelerate that process and kind of with one click, take care of a lot of these things automatically. And so anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that today with Craig. Now, because these are good for helping other people, these are, this podcast and the blog about best and worst gift, those are great things to share. And I'm always looking for new listeners and trying to reach new people. So these would be great ones to share with others on your social media, or maybe just to kind of chat about over the holidays as you're, hanging out with friends and family. I would very much appreciate that. All right, but let's get to the interview. Craig's got some great things to tell us. So let's hear him directly from Craig. Craig Danuloff is a technology entrepreneur who has founded a series of tech companies, including desktop publishing, e-commerce, ad tech, identity, and now consumer privacy. Craig's a graduate of the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business and the author of over 20 computer books. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Craig.
Sure. Great. Happy to be here.
So with the holidays coming up, and many of us will be buying and receiving gifts, and these may be tech devices or online services, all of which have security and privacy implications that many people just won't be aware of. We'll likely also to be visiting family and friends who may already be using similar devices and services. So this seems like an excellent time to talk about, how modern Internet Connect devices and services that require access to our personal information can be privacy and security risks. And, how we can eliminate or at least maybe mitigate some of those risks. And not just for ourselves, but, again, because it's the holidays, we're going to be seeing friends and family, or we'll be at their houses or whatever, maybe to take care of those people as well while we're there. So, but before we start, tell us a little bit more about you and yourself and how, tell us a little bit more about your company and, what drove you to starting a privacy business.
Yeah. Well, I've been an entrepreneur. I somewhat coincidentally started starting companies right around the time that the internet first emerged. And I actually had a company to publish data on CD-ROM in the mid-90s. And one of our customers was Office Max, who is, I think, gone now or absorbed somewhere. And they called us one day and said, we were publishing their catalog to CD-ROM, and they asked if we could put it on this new internet thing. So we figured out how to do a save as HTML and put commerce on the internet, 94, pretty early. And that transformed the company. It became an e-commerce platform company in the following years. So I was very involved in wave one and whatever you want to call it of e-commerce. A few years later, I started a company that helped manage the ads on the side of Google. So kind of early ad tech, and did a number of years there. So I saw, the collection of data begin, and along with a lot of these internet technologies. A little bit later, the impact of the data we were collecting was something I was thinking a lot about. And I started a company in the little window where there was something we all called quantified self, when it was just fun and interesting to track your own data metrics.
Yeah.
But even at that company, I was trying to protect the data, meaning use it for your advantage, as opposed to letting all those companies collecting it use it for their advantage. That company didn't really get too far, but I still thought about that. And about 3-4 years ago, I started thinking about how hard it was for an individual to protect themselves and make all the little changes and add all the tools and take all the steps it takes to stop sharing or leaking so much data.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is an asymmetric problem. People leak data endlessly. They don't know it, and they don't have the expertise to stop it. How could we help them? And so I formed this company called the Privacy Co. And I've got some partners, a corporate sponsor, who I co-founded the company with. And we've been working on the problem for a couple of years. We have this app called Priiv, where we try to make it easy for an individual to protect themselves.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that later when we talk about some solutions. But in your view, let me get a couple quick takes from you on this before we dive into those details. In your view, how do we get where we are today? Like, what really gave rise to surveillance capitalism? And how did this whole data mining industry manage to escape meaningful regulation, at least so far, like in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I do think about that, having been there, involved, as I said, when we were first putting stores on the internet and taking credit cards, and all of a sudden we figured out, hey, we could, the very first or the very early data analytics and online tracking, and while we could know who came before and we could know what they looked at, and it was just, innocent and innocuous. The efforts at the early time was just to make the functionality better, serve the clients better, help the customers. And so a lot of this evolved out of sort of innocent tools that got out of hand.
Yeah.
First of all, the technology, scaled massively. And ultimately, things that were created in data that's collected with benign intentions, there became bad ways to use it, and people started exploiting that. And over time, you have competitive pressures. Obviously, the amount of money involved accrued. The whole advertising and ed tech got involved. And I even think that's benign and innocent originally. Like, people need to market and advertise, but they're incentivized dramatically to leverage every technical capability, and the capabilities were so dramatic that they wound up making sort of powerful and harmful tools, right? And then you also, I think, have a morals problem, I would say, in the ed tech industry. Meaning, there's problems with what they say about how often ads are displayed and who actually saw them, and so it just spiraled, basically, right? It's just death by 1,000 cuts times 1,000,000. And ultimately, we got in a situation where people's data is being collected, it's being aggregated, it's being analyzed and augmented through analysis or some kind of inference that's put on these things. And that data, the aggregation of that data has a lot of value. And that data can be used by bad people to harm individuals in a lot of ways. So it started off innocently enough, and I think over 20 years it got very intense and got very dangerous. And over the last few years, fortunately, people have realized how serious it is. People have started protecting themselves more. There's more pressure put on companies to collect less data, offer more options to opt out of things, and and even slowly, as you well know, government regulations getting involved where it needs to be. And so, I think 25 years into the ditch, and we're a couple of years on our way getting out.
Oh, I hope you're right. I've been giving a class for many years now, and there's a bullet toward the end where I look toward the future, and that bullet has said, things are going to get better before they get worse. And that bullet's been there for like 6 straight years. And I think, but you might be. I hope you're right. I hope we're actually, maybe turning a corner. Real quick, because you've been there, maybe help us understand, why is collecting and selling our personal data so lucrative? And what exactly is our data being monetized to do? What types of data are maybe most valuable to these companies, these data brokers?
Well, the challenge in all of this is there's many answers to really each of these questions, right? So the value is being derived in many, many places in many different ways. Generally, from an individual point of view, they are most valuable as a target for advertising. I mean, some people individually may be more valuable for personal targeting of their bank account or their identity or something like that. But for most people, their individual data isn't worth very much. But when they're in a bucket with 10,000 or 100,000 others, it does have value.
Sure.
So there's this sort of, it's not really asymmetric, but there's this linearity to where the value is and where the risk is. So we get in this situation where it's hard to explain to someone why, the company knowing that they came to that website or someone knowing their location is individually harmful. And yet when you take another approach to it and say, well, gee, would you like someone to know, maybe you don't mind they know you went to that one place, but would you want them to know every place you went? And when you start thinking about what they can infer from all those places you went, then you get the creepy factor starts building up and people start, backing away. Yeah. So it's lucrative because there's the advertising side of it, and then there's the sort of crime, more intense effort kind of stuff.
Sure. So allow me to play devil's advocate here for a second. And, and ask maybe this question. Is privacy a lost cause at this point? I mean, given the sheer volume of my personal data that has already been harvested and shared with so many third parties, many of which I'll never know, do I really have any hope of clawing it all back and taking meaningful control over it again? Let's assume for a second that you're going to say, yes, you can. And the next question then obviously is, how much time and effort is it going to take for me to do that?
Yeah, well, first, I think that's kind of the most important question. There's two reasons I think people don't take any action and protect themselves in this, as you know. One is it's too late, which you're suggesting it's already out there. And two is I've got nothing to hide. And there's different responses to both of those. Mm-hmm. But if you have a leak, you want to stop it, right? That's my view. And for 90% of the data that you're responsible for sharing, that is where you're getting nothing for sharing it, but giving up a lot by allowing it to be shared, stolen, leaked, whatever word you want to use. You can cut that data off, and I think it's worth the relatively minor effort to do so. The other thing, to the point about data's already out there, a lot of data about you is already out there. The data that's out there about you, not all of it, but some of it, decays in value fairly dramatically. I mean, the advertising market, data that's 6 months old, profiling data, targeting data, that they don't pay a lot of attention to. So if you stop now, if you start using a search engine that's not tracking you, or add tracking blockers to your website, or change some location sharing settings on your phone, you're going to meaningfully decrease by double-digit percentages how much data you're sharing, and therefore what's known about you and the footprint and the way you're getting, the risks you're facing, and we'll talk, I think, in a few minutes about the different kinds of risks, can decrease. So you can make it appreciably better with some simple actions. Now, the second part of your question is, how hard is that? There's a lot to do, but you get the biggest bang for your first steps. You can really make a lot of difference by doing, 10, 15 things. You can do them all at once. You can do them over time. And like anything else, it becomes addictive because you understand more. You're more sensitive to the things that you're now letting go. And you can just iterate over time. One of the things we put in Priiv from the beginning, which was, I've sometimes almost jokingly regretted it because it's so much effort, is a score. And we put the score in because no one knows where they are, or they don't know the impact of what they do. And we wanted people to have context to say, okay, if I, switch my default search engine from Google to DuckDuckGo, or if I add a tracking blocker, or if I, change these settings or add this other utility, two-factor authentication or something, what does that do? And we wanted you to see a dial move further or see a number move up. So, that had an impact on me. Yeah.
Well, I think I've made that point too, and I think it's important to realize that your data does have a half-life, that it does, its value does decay over time, so that there is value in stopping. Which is, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a really good point. And yeah,
it's also
go ahead.
Also, sorry, one of the things that we recommend, and we don't probably make a big enough point about it in the app, is sort of obscure through obfuscation, just sort of polluting the data. using more names and email addresses and
Right.
private email addresses and burner cell phone or burner privacy.com credit cards, you can pollute the data either by diffusing your footprint or by putting bad data in there. And that's a little more advanced and not everyone might want to do it, but a little bit of effort in that way muddies that old data up so it's less useful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I've drawn a lot of attention to over the years, and is that the marketers, it used to be back in the day when you sign up for an account, you could pick your username. Now, if it was a popular service, it might have to be, Kerry Parker, really cool guy, 1925, right? Or whatever. You'd have to go with some goofy name because it was taken. And then somewhere, some bright marketing guy said, well, let's make it an email address. It's guaranteed to be unique. Oh, and we can now send this guy, a bunch of email. And now, because we're all settling on emails, and actually now today it's almost more your mobile phone number. These things don't change. I mean, for most people, their email address and their phone number in particular is theirs for life. It's almost like your government ID.
Yeah, it's why the Google Plus, you add a plus sign in a word after the first part of your email is a great trick and tip if anyone who doesn't know about it. So my email is craig@theprivacy.co. I can sign onto a service as Craig plus analytics company at theprivacy.co. Google ignores that plus in the word, which means A, they don't match when someone tries to match them up. And B, if I ever get spam or someone else comes in on that email, I know where they came from. Mm-hmm. For people who don't want to create more sophisticated levels of burner accounts, it's a good way to do it. Not everything works. It does fail some percentage of the time. I will have to disclaim that. But most of the time you can use it and it helps.
Yeah. So, and you touched on this for a second, and this is the one other aspect I want to talk to before we get into some specifics, and that is that a lot of people still feel that privacy concerns are just totally overblown. I get this whenever I talk about it to people. Someone invariably asks, why is privacy so important? And because they feel that their own data isn't valuable or interesting. They feel that they're just some of it's from the government perspective and some of it's from the corporate perspective. But either way, they don't put much effort into protecting it because they just don't feel like it has much value. But the point I like to make, I'd like to get your take on this, is it's not just about privacy. First of all, your data is other people's data. It's your contacts and things you're exposing to other people. But second, there are security risks involved with sharing that information. Do you agree?
Yeah, and it is a core problem in convincing people, which is unfortunately a part of this game, that they need to spend the time and take the action to protect themselves. The way we think about it is that there's at least 4 that we talk about categories of harm. And we find that when you talk about these and make them sort of explicit, then people are much more likely to realize that, I want to avoid that kind of harm. Or maybe not all of them, but some, one or more of them they have a feeling about. So the way we think about it, the first one is kind of the personal data leak world of your photos, your things you did, things you said are available to either everyone or someone. And that's kind of an embarrassment bucket, right? That it might be getting a job and someone finds out you posted something, or it might be anything that would be embarrassing or have a reputational damage that could aggregate over time. So that's one reason to just, and we have lots of things in throughout Priiv to help you prevent leaving data. Now, you don't have to not create it. You don't have to not participate in an online world, but you can do things to make sure it's not accessible to everyone or it doesn't last forever, because who wants to be embarrassed one or another? Yeah. The next is kind of the marketing world. We'd call it ad tracking, which some people really hate seeing ads follow them around. Some people don't mind. Some people like what quote unquote personalization. Some people hate it. And that's fine. That's a reasonable personal taste. The problem, as you well know, is that lots of ad tech is more aggressive in what they collect. They're not simply using your data to target an ad to you. And the way I think about it, it's manipulation. And obviously in the last couple political cycles, we saw cases where profiles built for advertising were used for, political or any other conceptual message pushing or filter bubble creation to steer you somewhere. So do you want people to show you things that they think you should see? Well, then you probably want to cut down on the tracking. And generally that world is, 100% insidious. Yeah. So, adding a tracking blocker, using a private search engine, doing these things that cut that data avoids that world of harm for you. The third is financial, which is the easy one to get everyone's attention. Whether it's identity theft or some sort of direct fraud or you being scammed in some way, allowing people to have enough data to either access an account, fool a relative, or create a new account in your name, right? That's bad. And people tend to not want that.
Right.
That's a bunch of stuff you can usually prevent. And the last category we tend to think of as harm and harassment. It kind of centers around location data, but also other identity data. And there's a smaller group of people maybe, but there's many people who can be subject to physical harm or, mental or verbal harassment or other just bad behavior,
right,
because people can know too much about them.
Right. Yeah.
So, when you break it down, any of this, I think privacy is a concept. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. It, used to mean looking in your window or reading your diary, and that's not what we're talking about. But when you talk about public embarrassment or people changing the world you see or taking your money or tracking you down and confronting you, those things people want to avoid. And all of the tactics that you in your book and us in Priiv try to help people do reduce risk of these things. And I think it's not hard to get people to say they don't want to sign up for any of those.
Right. All right. So now let's get to the fun stuff. Let's actually get to some specifics and some ways that we can mitigate and or even eliminate some of these risks. So I want to talk about a few different big kind of areas here. So let's start with social media. We've talked about that already a little bit already. A concept founded on the very idea of sharing information. What are the main ways that people leak too much information in their social media, and what can they do to fix that?
Yeah, and this is also a great example of the fact that you can participate, but by simply taking advantage of settings and options and choices that by now all of these companies provide, you can get the good out of them and mitigate dramatically, the bad.
Right.
Facebook, largely through pressure over the last 10 years, has added an enormous amount of settings. I think they have a department there in charge of moving them around and renaming them every 6 months, so they're hard to find.
Yes, I'm
which
sure
is
they
a
do.
problem.
Yeah,
we've been building some automation, as you know, recently, which makes this game even more fun for us.
Mm-hmm.
But on Facebook, for example, the most significant settings, I would say, there's one for off Facebook tracking, right? So Facebook has been, and they've through, I don't know if it was litigation or government reasons, they've cut off some of this, but they were buying what you bought at the grocery store, your credit card purchase information. They also get data from, as their tracking pixel is on 60, 70% of all the websites out there. You can turn that off and say, Facebook, okay, I know you're going to know what I do on Facebook because that's your property, first party data, but I don't want you adding to what you know about me through the rest of my life. You click a toggle, they stop doing that. You can disable Facebook location tracking. You can disable the facial recognition, which they're now going to disable themselves permanently. There's probably 10 or 12, in the list in Priiv for Facebook, maybe more. That is all benefit to you. It will cost you nothing in your Facebook experience. It costs them a lot in terms of reducing your value to them. And most of the other platforms have this. On Google, the top 3, which we also have in our automation feature as well as Priiv, you can turn off the search history and web tracking. You can turn off the location tracking, which in Google, as you also know, you can see what they have now if you want to be scared. Go look at this list of every place you've ever been and when and where and what you did there.
Oh, you should definitely do that too. Yes,
and then you can also turn off ad personalization, which probably doesn't change any data they have, but changes who gets to use the data to influence you, if you're willing to call advertising and marketing and maybe other people's use of that. So 3 switches in Google dramatically change, your profile. Even if you want to still use Google Maps and Google search, which I personally wouldn't do, but if you do, definitely turn off those 3 things. Google Gmail has great security, so we use it. A lot of other people still use it. You go down the list, right? This is what Priiv is full of, right? When I very first started this, the first sort of proof of concept exercise I did was to say, okay, how long of a list, if I write down all the settings changes that I would recommend to a friend, how long would it be? And what you find is, A, there's a lot of settings. B, if you go research from the internet, most of the writing about it is very advanced, technical, sophisticated, and sort of off-putting to the average user.
Right, yeah.
And like everything else on the internet, there's 5 opinions and 3 of them are crazy and one of them's wrong. So you have this, there really wasn't an aggregation of, okay, here's the checklist. This is what we now call them in the app. do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And here's why. And here's, things have consequences. This may cause you inconvenience. This may make this behave this way. You might, we recommend most things. Some things we say consider, which generally means it's a toss up, but there's a good reason for a lot of people to not use it. So the point is you can do a lot. And to your earlier question, right, each of these things, if Google's now not tracking my location and Facebook's not getting my off Facebook data and LinkedIn, there's things on LinkedIn you can turn off. I've just stopped a large percentage of the data that was going to be sitting out there and only used against me from being there. And that's a lot of impact.
What sort of data do we leak when we just surf the web? And there's, to me, it seems like there's kind of two aspects to that. There's the passively part where maybe we're just searching or browsing, and then maybe actively, like when we actually sign up for something or buy something on the web. What are we leaking there? And then what can we do to maybe limit or eliminate some of those breadcrumbs we leave?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a good way to think about it. So there's some things that are just happening mechanically because you're searching the web. You're connected to whatever your ISP is. That's going through a system. And as we know now, I forget who put out an analysis just a few weeks ago that our ISPs are collecting and using that trail of data a lot more than they all swore that they were. And then you're volunteering a lot of information. And generally speaking, there's things you can do about a lot of that. On the sort of core browsing issue, the more fundamental technical level, Apple's new private relay, I think is great. It's functionally a VPN. Forgetting, there's an argument about technically whether it is or not, but it's obfuscating, where I'm going to most of the people between me and there. And it's not perfectly transparent or harm-free, but it's, and this has always been the problem with VPNs. I like them, but I generally don't recommend them to beginners or people who don't want hassle and inconvenience in their life because it's hard to go a day without needing to turn it off and then remember to turn it back on. And Apple's, my experience, and they're still calling it beta, obviously, but private relay is, in the high 90s percentages. I think anyone who uses it still needs to be aware it's on because you might have to toggle it. And Apple hopefully will do more to, make that easy and to crowdsource figuring out where it breaks and then just turn it off automatically.
Right.
But that's a big thing. I mean, so what we're talking about is letting people know a list of all the sites you've been to or letting a harmful Wi-Fi access point, grab everything you do in one specific place. We talked before about, email, either using the plus trick if you got Google or using burner emails from MySudo or from one of the other services that uses emails. Most of the things here are advanced, meaning, well, actually, let me back up a second. The first thing I think that you and I would probably agree on is you want to have tracking blockers installed in your website because most web pages are kind of 25% web page and 75% tracking mechanism.
Right. Yep.
So whether it's, now it's built in more and more, even to Safari, but something like Brave that we like a lot, and Firefox has a lot of blocking in there. There's maybe some other issues there. So a browser that is protecting you and then an add-on, one of the many, whether it's DuckDuckGo or there's dozens of them we have listed in Priiv, and I'm sure people are aware of. Yep. But some sort of tracking blocker, it's really almost illogical to not use because, again, it's costing you nothing. Maybe a little inconvenience. I shouldn't say nothing because sometimes they can stop a page from working. Many of them are very easy to toggle off if you need to, if a page won't load or behave. And then, back to the data that you share, email addresses, we talked about ways to deal with. I'm a big fan of privacy.com and using kind of one time or one site credit cards for online purchases is a good trick. And then maybe back a second to the generic private search. I use Google for maybe 2% of all my searches and have used DuckDuckGo primarily. And now Brave has a built-in private search that's very nice. That's a great example where you see, it seems innocuous, but you see the result. You do one search for a medical condition that a friend has or a situation that you saw on TV and the ads start following you around. And you think about what's happening you didn't know about. That's an easy change. The quality of the search is great. So you combine those 5 or 6 things we just said, turn on private relay, use a good browser, maybe use different browsers for different situations. I mean, I think most people would do that, but I probably use a different browser in financial related things than the one I use every day, because the one I use every day, even despite my best efforts, probably is tracked and they're aggregating enough fingerprint data to know something about that person. And I'd rather that not, influence certain situations.
Right. Actually, just to that point real quick, as long as we're giving tips, one of the great things that Firefox added recently, I think in the last year, is they've got something built in called Firefox Containers now, which is kind of like private browsing in a sense, but it's more like containerized where I can give personalities, like I can have a work, it's like you said, it was like having different browsers for it, but you actually just kind of do that all within one browser. You can say these are work tabs, these are personal tabs, these are financial tabs, and you can create your own. And it just kind of compartmentalizes that data, which is really kind of nice.
Yeah, we do like that.
All right, so moving on. So the software that we all install on our computers, and maybe especially the apps that we install on our smartphones, have the potential to access vast troves of deeply personal information. In recent years, operating system vendors like Apple, Google, and Microsoft have started putting up some more roadblocks, in the form of app permissions. But first of all, how do we evaluate a given app's privacy risks before we install it? And I'm not just talking smartphone apps, but I'm talking software you might install on your computer as well. And second, how do we best use these kind of newer operating system level controls, to minimize the risks if we do end up installing it?
Yeah, this one's tough. And, the way I think about the levels of protection, there's sort of the things you control yourself, the settings you make and the decisions you make. There's the companies you associate with, which might be buying a device or installing an app or doing business with a company. And then the third layer is sort of the governmental layers. Are you being protected by the system beyond you? So you're kind of now getting from the personal layer into the middle layer. And there you have to really be a wise or studied consumer and make sure you're not doing business with somebody that everyone else has already figured out is doing bad things.
Right.
Because you don't really have a ton of control once,
right.
You put an app on your phone and you start using it. I mean, you do have that first level control, and we obviously put a lot of effort in helping you change the settings you can change. But you and your listeners are mostly aware there's APIs in these apps that can be doing things with data that, they didn't disclose or that you didn't control through settings. So that really becomes very tough. The increased pressure Apple and to some degree Google and Microsoft are putting in their ecosystems to stop people from doing the really heavy, hardcore malicious stuff is helpful. And that comes from consumer pressure, but there's not very much visibility into it, that we can have.
So what do you think about, Apple they've added these new, what they're kind of labeling nutrition labels for privacy, where they're actually, Apple's tried to standardize this way of kind of quickly at a glance seeing what at least their smartphone apps, and I don't know if they've done this for the regular App Store yet or not, for the Mac, but there kind of a quick glance, what data is collected about you and how it's used. First of all, do you like that? Second, how do you trust it? Like either that Apple is policing it properly, or that these people are, as far as I know, a lot of this is just done on the honor system.
Yeah, it's completely the honor system. Having an app in the App Store and answering the questions and reading a little bit about it. I think it's a great first step. It's by no means perfect in 5 or 10 different ways, but as evidenced by, Google's reluctance, it was kind of a bit of an industry, joke to watch Google fail to update their apps for 2 months because they didn't want to have to write down what they were doing, and Facebook the same. You can shave an edge off what you report, but if it's obvious you're doing something and you say you're not, users are going to call it out. So I think it's the beginning of the right framework. And I don't think at an individual level, many users are going to look at them, and you might make decisions if there's something way out of whack that you didn't know. But it forces, like anytime you force something to be written down and looked at, as a developer, I can tell you filling out that form, now it's a privacy app, maybe especially, you have to sort of wrestle with, okay, what are we doing? Why? So it's going to force questions back in the product development cycle.
Yeah.
I guarantee it's doing that, even at Google and Facebook. And it does make consumers somewhat aware. So I think second, third, fourth generations of these things will get better. I think Apple will, first of all, they'll force other ecosystems to do it. And I think maybe Google has announced something for Android that's similar. And they will over time automate, the parts they can automate. And then what will happen, and I think this is starting to happen, is third parties will start taking that data and aggregate it and analyze it and add more value to it.
Yeah.
We've played with some things to try to turn it to both compare different apps to them, to each other. So, okay, you need a private messaging app. What do they say about themselves? Well, that becomes useful because there's many of those and they're very different. So I'm all for it. I think it's, back to that 25-year or 10-year, whatever it is, road to privacy here. I think it's a good step, and I'm really glad that Apple did it.
Me too. I mean, I personally think transparency is the first step in a lot of these things, just knowledge and awareness, because a lot of times it's just not it. These companies have gotten to be really good at dark patterns and obfuscation as far as what they're doing, and having somebody say, okay, look, we're going to set a basic standard here that everyone's going to have to answer the same questions in the same way, with the same answers in the same English words that we all come to mean the same thing, as opposed to these euphemisms, right? Enhanced experience and all these things that they're basically means they're tracking you. So I think it's great that they're doing it. And then you're right. It's a great point that it allows now third parties to come along and digest that data, like thinking nutrition labels that are on all of our products that we buy now. That's allowed Weight Watchers and all these other companies to go through and comb through those. And now you have an app where you could add all that stuff up, and it's just the first step. So I totally agree that I think it's a great first step, and I'm looking forward to that being refined. Just, even the nutrition labels, right? Even over the years, those have gotten better too, right? So same thing.
Yeah, it's hard to do things that apply to everyone. The questions, again, on the developer side, people don't see them. They're very generic, meaning there's valid interpretation as to what they're trying to ask you, and therefore you have to figure out how to answer. I think it's going to get to be a very time-consuming process for developers over time as they add specifics and precision to those questions. But it's all to the good. I mean, the problem in this whole world is the bad 5% or 1% or whatever it is have kind of ruined everything. And now you have people who, and it's really one of the things I'm obviously fairly, intense about privacy, but I do think the privacy community tends to, scream bloody murder when something is theoretically possible. Mm-hmm. In other words, something that doesn't generally create a lot of risk, but it could. They as their role, worry about the worst case scenario.
Right.
But that means everything can't be a 10-alarm fire. Right. And if everything's a 10-alarm fire, then users saying, "Well, look, I gotta pick something. I gotta do something. I can't not do this." Right. So I think if this helps us get gradations, where this is a level 10 problem, this is a level 5 problem, this is a level 1 problem, or risk is maybe a better word than problem, that'll help. So I think we'll continue to see good things come out of that.
Yeah, and that is an excellent point. And you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say. A lot of some people, the purists, will say, well, just basically get off the grid, and that you can't do that today. I mean, you can't participate in your own democracy if you're off the grid today. You've got to you're gonna have a smartphone. So how do you mitigate the risks where you can and still participate?
Well, the thing that makes me think of, which is really central to this whole privacy issue, is that the old enterprise security world, right? There's threat models, and there's people generally realize that not everyone has the same risk factors.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the way we think about it, they also don't have the same preferences. So there isn't a generic privacy goal for everyone. Everything's got to be personalized. And what the average person has to do versus someone who's got a lot of resources or access or control or data versus someone who's, sort of mega wealthy or has, maybe an individual personal target. Those are three at minimum very distinct risk factors and situations. And therefore, everything that's recommended has to be applied to each of those. So the problem is that many of the things that really are no risk to an average person get screamed about as if they were all, the billionaire CEO of whatever company, and then they're scared of then they give up because if, like you say, I can't quit. So it'd be nice to figure out some broader levels or groupings to put these in and say, if you're an X, this is okay, but if you're a Y, you better not do that. We try to do that in Priiv, but it's
almost like the
problem.
CVE scores. I mean, the CVE scores taken, and that's more of a security thing, and that's getting a little technical here, but those, they have like gradations for different things like that you score things on. Maybe eventually we need something like that for privacy as well. Okay, so two apps in particular I've got to ask you about, and because I get asked this all the time, and and I know you must too. So I want to hear what you tell people because maybe I can use that. So people ask me about antivirus software and VPN services all the time. Like those are like the go-to things. Like when people hear a little bit about security or privacy, like those are the tools that people say this is what you got to have. And then well, if I got to have them, which ones do I have? And then do I really need to use them? So I often tell them, though, that because you almost have to treat these things like your you're hiring a bodyguard. I mean, these people, for these tools, these kinds of tools to do their job, they have to have privileged access. They need to know everything you're doing and get all up in your business. And so therefore, you better trust them. And they have been shown in the past to have both privacy and security risks. And sometimes I think the cure is worse than disease. So I'm really curious to get your take on that particular question. When somebody asks you, hey, what antivirus software should I use or what VPN server should I use? What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree. You are putting your trust in one place more than people realize. It's also interesting to me the way you phrase that question, because probably if it was asked a different way, I wouldn't put either of those in the top 5 or the top 10. So it's almost like the broadest distributed information is 5 or 10 years old, right?
Sure.
Which is it's not uncommon. The virus protection stuff, in my view, has been absorbed by the operating system developers sufficiently that I haven't personally used one in way more than a decade. I was certainly into all those things 20 years ago, but I think Mac and even Windows handle that. I'm not an Android person, so I can't really speak, to that world. So I don't think speak of or recommend anything in the antivirus world. I think that's kind of past tense. VPNs is incredibly complicated. And I think it's a perfect example of what we talked about before about levels of user. For the average person, what a VPN did was make sure that your ISP and any malicious hotspots you might accidentally connect to aren't listening to everything you do. I think Apple's Private Relay now for free handles that. And for many people, that's all they'll need. If you actually, communicate data, and also, as you know, HTTPS, 95% of the websites you're on are encrypted anyway. So other than the metadata, which is recent, yeah. So other than the metadata of where you went, it's not as much of a risk as it used to be. Again, if you're not on, a hotspot at a motel that you don't necessarily, trust. When you get into picking the VPNs, it's probably obviously a longer conversation than we want to have here because, they do have the exact problem you just talked about. And I know, someone recently rolled up 5 or 10 of the better known names, and they're owned by a guy that was primarily a marketing spammer before. So that's, not a good thing. I think Apple stepped in just the right time, with Private Relay. If you're a person that needs a VPN, and I don't generally, many people use VPNs to location shift, and that may be a VPN function. I don't think it's a VPN benefit. That's just a trick, a feature that they happen to do. But if you're in that third class and you're a targeted individual who someone might be, a professional level group may be snooping on, you better hire the right person or do the right research because you have a very different question about a VPN than the average person does. We do recommend probably 5 or 6 different VPNs that I think for an average person are safe. They're not owned by companies that have, I don't know that anybody's been proven to do anything, but have, suspicious traits or curious, questionable business practices. So there's still 6 or 8 that, the magazines that do the in-depth reviews and users like yourself that have looked at say are fine. And, we recommend those. But most, we're a little bit Apple-centric still. Apple Private Relay, I think, is going to generally put that away.
Okay, so a very popular thing in the recent years, especially around, I think, Christmas time, when people start thinking about fun gifts to give to people, is to give something that's "quote unquote" smart. And so, everyone wants to sell us a smart version of something that was heretofore dumb. These devices that, just by connecting them to the internet, they somehow get better, like thermostats, refrigerators, smoke alarms, TVs, speakers, doorbells, coffee makers, toasters, you name it. All these things are, it's got to be better if you somehow put it on the internet. But they've obviously got problems too. So what are the primary security and privacy risks for these, what we call IoT or Internet of Things devices? And what recommendations do you have to share for maybe dealing with some of those problems? Yeah,
well, I think this goes back to the beginning of the problem, comes to what we talked about at the start of this discussion, which is, the manufacturers of the devices, their first impulse is generally to add something that is a cool, interesting, or useful feature. Most of them are not built to collect or leak or data or create risk. They do that because they're often not so thoughtful about the way they do it.
Right.
But so other than the smart euphemism winning the marketing war, I think there's cool features we all want, right? I mean, I'm Hue lights or something that I use and really like, and smart speakers and other things. Yep. So the bigger brands, generally because of in-house, they have the dollars and the people to worry about the core security that you need. And 2, they have the user bases who include people who call them out when they're doing bad or stupid things,
Right.
is probably, the safest way to go. Also, the bigger ones tend to have options, settings that let you turn off this, change that, like the difference between routers, right, that don't even let you change your password in the old days or something like that.
Right.
Then you get to this sort of middleware layer where you can either be a purist and say, look, I will not have an Amazon Echo in my home because it conceptually creates the risk of listening, or Amazon's behavior in other areas has not been, exemplary.
Yeah.
That war, I don't think we're winning, right? And the numbers of Echo devices and Alexa devices suggest, that's not happening.
Right.
But the pressure has caused them to, you can now say to Echo, erase my historical data.
Right.
You can change settings to make them not save that data, which is a lot of the risk for an average person. Again, if I'm being targeted, if I'm a government official or a newspaper reporter of a certain kind, I'm going to not have that device in my home because now I'm subject to a kind of risk that the average person isn't. The average person just buy from the bigger companies, investigate the settings and use them. Amazon's another one that we put in our new automation feature, so you can push a button and we'll change all the Echo settings so they're the safe mode. Most people don't know about those settings. They don't take the time to look for them.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, again, they got the benefit of the Alexa device, but they volunteered for this risk because they didn't opt out. Now, should people have to opt out versus have to opt in? That's a different discussion. So like everything else, at the end of the day, I think it's being a little thoughtful in your purchases. Are you doing business with a company that you want to? And I wouldn't buy a thermostat or a doorbell from a no-name company. Amazon's actually an interesting case study there, right? So Ring and that world is done some very harmful, damaging things intentionally. But if I absolutely had to have one, I don't know that I'd buy theirs, but I'm saying versus a no-name brand on Amazon where I don't know what's in the firmware, I don't know what's going to come up, I don't know what it's connecting to.
Right.
I'd rather have the one that thousands of people are looking at. So pick a good company, make sure the settings are, optimized for your actual protection. And there are some use case controls that you can put in place as well that we talk about.
All right, so last question. This might be the hardest one, honestly, and I don't know that you've got. I can't imagine actually how your app even could address this, but I'm just curious because it's gotten so bad, and that is tracking our movement, our behaviors has really made a dramatic shift to the real world, like in real life. Things like facial recognition in stores or in parking lots, or honestly all over the place. Cameras are everywhere, and facial recognition is getting added to a lot of them. Wireless tracking. We carry our phones with us that have multiple wireless things in them that are broadcasting all sorts of weird IDs without us doing anything. It's just kind of naturally how they work, and that allows us to be tracked by those devices. So in the real world, in public spaces, our devices are kind of giving us away, and our faces and whatever. So do you happen to have any tips for how we might protect our privacy when we're out in the real physical world?
Well, most of those things, unfortunately, as your question implies, you don't have a lot of control over. The two that I think about the most, that most people don't think about much, are license plate readers and EasyPass.
Right.
I heard somewhere, and I don't know if I have if I can source this, but that an EasyPass is read, 50 or 60 times between the Lincoln Tunnel and Times Square, which is, a mile. Meaning you think once you went through the toll booth, it's done. But other people have listening devices that are tracking that location. There's companies that pay other firms to drive through parking lots collecting the license plate of everybody who's parked. Because if I know you parked outside of Saks Avenue versus parked outside of, the dollar store, right, I know something else about you.
Right. Yep.
And facial recognition, these are very hard systemic issues. These to me are in that third ring of the government or local laws are going to have to work with. And that's A, not easy, and B, has as much bad consequence and unintended harm as good that they might cause. I think the location tracking element that was in your list there is the one most people can do the most about. You can limit which apps have location access. I turn off location tracking overall on my phone a huge amount of the time. Means when I want the map, I have to go turn it on, but I'm generally shocked how many days I went without it. Now, I don't think, in my case that, again, the individual risk of anyone knowing where I am is significant, but I just don't like the idea that those lists are being built up. And there's, so, broadly, you're right. You can't do very much. I think you can, again, set settings and think about it a little bit. The one exception I would make, and the one case I think people should, take specific actions, is participating in protests.
Mm-hmm.
And we're maybe a little bit past, protest season, but we have said a year or two of a lot of those.
Yeah.
And at least, I'm in New York City, and the first thing you see when there's a protest is the helicopters hover. And, I can't, I'm not saying I can prove this or prove source, but, it's been said that they're scooping up device IDs of phones from below.
Yeah.
And so, turning off the phone, leaving it at home, getting a burner, if your point is you're putting yourself in a situation of risk, then, you want to take action. And it brings to mind the other one that's been in the news a lot lately, which is Google complying with subpoenas relative to January 6th for location data. And, on one hand, right, all these things are double-edged, right? If someone did something wrong and that catches them, that's fine. But what I worry about in terms of location data is, if you're on the street where a crime is committed, but wasn't you, I would rather my phone data wasn't in the Google database to get handed to the police later.
Right. Yeah.
So, these are complex problems, and we probably can't be specific about solutions here, but being aware that you are sharing that data and that, turning off wholesale location access on your phone. Now, your internet service provider, your mobile provider will still have it.
Yeah. But
we hear more about Google, being subpoenaed for that data than Verizon and AT&T. They may be subpoenaed equally, in which case, we have a bigger problem. But some of this is awareness, and some of that awareness builds to public pressure, and that public pressure at some point builds to different laws and regulations of who can request what when. If nothing else, the requests now are too liberal and fulfilled too often. Yeah.
All right. So let's wrap this up a little bit with maybe on a positive note. So, and I get this a lot when I teach to class and on the book and things like that, where people just feel overwhelmed. Like we went through this litany of things that are bad, things that you've got to take care of, things you've got to do, and it becomes overwhelming. And even though it's theoretically possible for all of us to do these things, it just seems logistically infeasible. But that's where companies like you come in. So this is where I want you to tell us a little bit about Priiv and how, given all the things that we just walked through, and people are thinking, oh my God, how am I possibly going to do all these things? This is where your company comes in. So tell us about Priiv and what and how it might be able to help. And you've kind of mentioned it along the way, but tell us a little more detail about what your app can do to help people address this litany of things we just talked about.
Yeah, well, the litany is why we started the company, and the fact that even a couple of years later it still sounds so overwhelming is why it's a hard problem. What we do basically is try to help people in one place in a single app figure out what they need to do. The whole thing's personalized. We talked about before. We in a simplistic way let you choose. Do I want good, better, best privacy? Let's be simple about it. And do I care about? I'm more worried about financial risk than marketing risk, than embarrassment, than location and harassment, those kind of things. So once we get that data of your priorities and preferences, and you tell us you're a Mac user versus a Windows user, you have Facebook, you have Amazon, you ask a few questions to see where you're going to need to protect yourself. Then we basically present a series of checklists of these are the things you should do to protect yourself. And those have historically been just sort of recommendations, turn this setting off, enable this feature. We spent most of this year building automation, and we're now rolling out automation, meaning you click one button in Priiv, the app or website for the company we're talking about opens, we navigate to the setting, change it, and go back. So we can change, on the website right now, we can change 60 some settings in 3 minutes. So you get a whole ton of inconvenience solved for you very quickly. So one core of it is these privacy checklists that prioritize what to do, although you get a lot of flexibility. You can go, sort of start to finish. We have a default path, which is this is what we would do first, this is what we do second, this is what we do third, and you can work on that over time. But we also let you say, you know what, I just want to lock down my finances first. And you sort of click on the finances tracking area, and we say these are the things that have the most impact on locking down your finance, or I'm most worried about harassment or personal harm. I want to lock those things down. So that's a big part of it. We also include a lot of the risk these days, or some of the issue people need to worry about, is external data like you talked about before, that's already out there. So which data breaches have I been in? Which data brokers have my information? We have an identity theft protection package in there which will both scan for risks as well as there's $1 million policy if you do have a harm and white glove service to help you recover your identity if you have a remediation effort needed. So basically, we've just tried to bring together, take this conversation and just like your book does and said, okay, here's it laid out in order and here's how to do it. And then it's all wrapped in this scoring system. So we've created sort of a credit score for privacy where we plot. The difference between us and a credit score is everyone has the same theoretical credit score, perfection. But we realized because of threat models and because of preferences, everyone has a different privacy goal. So we set a privacy goal on our little numeric scale for you. We tell you where you are. And as you complete the steps that Priiv recommends, your score goes up. Now, you might set a low goal and say, I want good privacy, and then sort of get hooked on the idea and then change the goal to better privacy, and it'll move up over time. But as I said before, that helps people to have context to where they're standing and see the benefit for their action. So we're trying to aggregate it so it's not overwhelming. It's a big field. There's a lot of things, but it's presented in a sequential way. You can come and go as you please. It's updated as new things happen, settings change, new risks come up. We cover right now, I think, almost 50 apps and devices, hardware, software, IoT devices, and so forth. But we're still adding to that over time. And we've been adding these services like the broker scan. We now have data broker removal. So most people know if you search your name on the internet, someone's selling your address and every address you ever lived at and your sister's name and your company. You can push a button and have those removed, which you could do by yourself, but it would take hundreds of hours. We can do, most of them happen the same day, and then over the next week or two, get rid of all of them. So it's trying to be a one-stop shop, which is a hard goal.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I was very impressed by the amount of things you covered already. So real quick, what devices is this supported on, and what do you get for free versus the for pay version?
Yeah, so Priiv as an app is an iOS app only today. It does run on iPad and the M1 Mac, so you can run it on a Mac if you have an M1 chip, which is increasing number. Mm-hmm. And on the web today, we only have the settings automation, which is a sliver of the Priiv app. So, but if at priiv.app, anyone can go and for free, while it's in kind of a beta period, use the settings automation and change Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Amazon, I think are the four that are up there today. In terms of the app itself, as you said, there's a free mode where you get 5 email data breach reporting, both today and it'll monitor in the future and alert you if you ever have a new data breach in any of those 5 email addresses. You can see which data brokers have what data on you, but you have to pay to use our one-button removal. And then on the privacy checklists, there's all of the sort of beginner, minimum requirements everyone should do. Checklists are free, and then kind of a selection of other apps are free. But when you pay, you unlock all the checklists for everything. You unlock the data broker removal. You unlock the identity theft package, which includes both scans to alert you of identity theft activity, as well as the $1 million policy for protection in case of loss. And yeah, I think that's it today. So you unlock all the scans and all the data if you get the paid version. And most of those things, that's $9 a month. Most of those things sell for a couple $100 a year. So it's priced pretty attractively.
So I got to ask this question because if nothing else, I should have made my listeners paranoid enough to think this already. So I've got to ask the question again, devil's advocate. Why should I trust your app? How do I know that your app isn't? For example, you said it's going to log into Facebook. Do I give you my Facebook credentials? I mean, I know you don't, but explain that to the audience. Why we should trust your app? Why we should, what information you have to collect and know about us to do the things that you do on our behalf.
No, sure. Glad you asked. So the app itself, I'll separate the app from the automations because there's a distinction there. The app itself actually touches or collects very little information. So you're going to answer some questions, as I said, about your privacy goals and your environment. That you have an iPhone and an Apple Watch, and you have a Facebook and a LinkedIn account and a HomePod and whatever else you have. And then the app is going to know that you've checked off certain settings. I turned this off. I turned that on. I did this. It gains access to no accounts. It knows nothing about, we're an iPhone app, so we do, you log in with an email address. We do get IP back, through Apple. We do support Apple private login, so you can even give us a kind of a burner email address in that sense. But we're really not getting any information. We're not touching any of your accounts through the main app. We're building checklists for you and tracking what you've checked off. Okay, so the app is really, I don't think, putting anyone at any risk. There's some kind of profile there of you that you have these 3 apps and have done these 3 things, but there's nothing I think anyone would consider sensitive information.
And by tracking, just real quick, by tracking, you mean this is all on our system. This is you saying, okay, I've done this. This is not, the app doesn't magically know that you've gone to Facebook somehow. You've told it, here's what I think you should do, and you're checking a box, right?
Yeah, in the base app, the checklists, you check things off. As I've said about this over time, if you want to lie to Weight Watchers and say you didn't have a piece of cake, you can lie to Weight Watchers. I think this is self-protection. We're telling you what to do. You're keeping track of what you've done.
Okay.
Now, let me complicate factors with our new automations.
Yeah.
That's all great, and it's certainly safe. The problem is it is a lot of work to log into Facebook, find this setting, change it, mark it down, and it takes time and energy and all that. So what we've done over this year is built these automations, and we've built the ability to log into Facebook, log into Google, log into LinkedIn, log into Amazon, and so forth, find the setting, change it, and then report back to the app, and we'll throw the check switch for you. Let me tell you how we do that. We open it's a Safari extension. On the desktop, there's a Chrome extension, there's an Edge extension, there's a Firefox extension, although that was submitted 10 weeks ago, and I'm not sure it was approved yet. So on the desktop, we run in everything but Safari. We'll get there. We're not there yet. And on the iPhone, we're just about to ship. The Safari extension is out in the App Store today. We're about to upgrade it dramatically next week. So depending on when this airs, it'll probably already be out. They're scripts that navigate the websites and change the settings. What we do not do is ever get access to any login credentials or tokens. So what happens is you push a button in Priiv and say, change these 5 settings on Facebook. We recommend some settings. You say, yes, I want to change them. You say, go. We'll open up a browser, desktop or mobile. If that browser was already logged into Facebook in that example, it'll go to Facebook, navigate, make the changes, report back to us, and now you're back in the app. So we never saw the login, had the ability to grab the login, or hold any cookie. That means we don't have the ability to check once a month and make sure it's okay, which we would honestly like to provide, but we did not want to hold any tokens or access any login credentials. So in nutshell, that's how it works. There's a FAQ on our site about the security issues of this, but even in that situation, all we really gain is the knowledge of what your current settings are for the settings we changed. We do, by the way, keep track of where they were before we changed them. So in the app, there's going to be an undo feature, because I know sometimes people change settings and then the next day don't know why things are the way they are. So we didn't want to hear about it, so we wanted to give you a way to back up. But again, in the scope of the kind of information that using the internet, and we've talked about in this time frame, we're never holding much information. The information we do hold, I will say, in the app is encrypted, and the key information, like the data broker information and the data breach information, is encrypted with a key that your app holds, so we can't even get to it when you're not logged in. So without going too far on the technical side, I know you and I and our CTO had a conversation. We have tried to use proper protocols to protect the data that we do have.
All right, great. Last question before we go, and that is, just generally speaking, I'll kind of throw you an open one here, softball. What other tools and services might you recommend to people? When obviously you recommend your own, but when people ask you for websites or books, or I don't know, what's some kind of your go-to recommendations for people when they want to learn more or improve their privacy and security?
Well, there's two worlds there, right? So in terms of tools, and we didn't talk about it, although we covered a ton of ground today, there are a lot of other tools necessary, right? Authenticator apps, we mentioned VPNs, we talked about privacy browsers and private search engines. Also in Priiv, we track 12 or 13 categories of third-party privacy tools. And we include those we recommend. Most of them, there's 100, there's 100 password managers and there's 100, authenticator apps. We've looked at the ones we've looked at. I can't say we looked at every one, but we've included 3 or 5 or 2 or whatever we like in each category. 99% of those we have no business relationship with. We're just saying you need these also to be safe.
Yeah.
And part of what Priiv does is when you set that target of good, better, best privacy, we associate categories of tools that we think you should have. So if you say good, we say you're going to want to pick a private search engine, and when you tell us which one you have, that affects your score, and you'll get tips for how to use that search engine better. And we might tell you to use a tracking blocker. If you say you want better or best privacy, we now up that number from 3 tools to 5 tools to 7 tools. So our tool recommendations are built into Priiv.
Okay.
Other than that, obviously we've just met, but I've been a fan of your podcast for a long time, and I've just started in your book. I think that's a great place to start. Some of the, as you know, and we did briefly talk about this, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wired Magazine. There's a lot of people now on the beat who are doing a great job.
Yeah.
And in privacy Twitter and everywhere else, people can get a lot of information. It's overwhelming. A lot of times they cover issues, but they're reticent to make specific recommendations for what to do. I think because they don't want to, they realize people have different personal needs and situations, and they don't have enough space to delineate all that. But it's easier and easier to be aware of what's going on out there. And, I think that's evident in the fact that, I just came through an airport and saw DuckDuckGo ads 50 feet tall on every wall.
Oh, wow.
Privacy's entered the social consciousness now, and the average person is trying to figure out how to do something, and we're trying to help. Obviously, you've been helping for a long time.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much for all those recommendations, and thanks for coming on the show, Craig.
Sure, Kerry. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So thanks again to Craig for coming on the show and sharing his great tips and great insights on privacy and even security today. Because they really do go hand in hand. And a lot of people, I think, write off privacy because they don't think they're interesting. But unfortunately, that information, the same information that you think is not that useful, could be really used against you. And I really like the way you kind of ticked off those kind of 4 areas of harm. And I think that really drives the point home. There are lots of ways in which you leaking data can bite you in the butt. And so it is important. And I think it's great that we were able to kind of break those down and give you several reasons why you might want to do this. And Priiv is a great way to do it. I mean, I really, really enjoyed talking with Craig, both offline and in the interview, because I think we're really kind of kindred spirits. I mean, we see that there's all these things out there to be done, and we just want to help people get them done, because it would really help all of us. And one thing I guess we didn't really touch on in the interview today, but there really is kind of a herd immunity thing here. There's the more of us that do these things, the better off we will all be, because it just makes it that much harder for viruses and scams and disinformation and some of these things to spread when some of us are quote unquote inoculated. And I know that unfortunately here in the U.S. that terms like vaccinations and inoculations and things are now politically tinged, but they really shouldn't be. From a purely scientific standpoint, we really can help all of each other out by helping just our neighbors kind of get up and running on these things and get their own houses in order. And it really does help all of us. So real quick, I did manage to confirm here at the last minute before I'd finished up recording for the week. I talked with Craig, and he said they are going to be giving away some of their checklists for free next week that normally would fall under the subscription. Again, a lot of the basic stuff is free. You just download the app. The app itself is free, and you could do a lot of things, a lot of the basic checklists, that everyone kind of needs to do without having to pay anything. But there are some checklists that come with a subscription. Among other things, there's a lot of reasons you might want to get a subscription. But a lot of those checklists will be free next week, kind of for Thanksgiving. So I think he told me between Wednesday and Monday next week. So if you want to give it a shot, that would be a great time to try it out. And again, if you're going to be hanging out with friends and family, show them about it too, and maybe help them get through those checklists as well while you're there. And if you want to do it quickly, check out some of those automations he was talking about. So anyway, great stuff. Really appreciate Craig coming on the show. I want to circle back to a couple things he mentioned. He did talk about privacy.com, and that is something I've been kind of wanting to talk about on the show for a while, and I probably should have mentioned it maybe in last week with the Best and Worst Gift Guide, because that's a really, really interesting service. And honestly, I don't know why credit cards companies have not just blindly copied all of these features, but it really puts a nice kind of virtual layer between you and merchants. When you're trying with anybody that wants your credit card number. And it lets you kind of obfuscate yourself, give yourself some extra privacy and certainly some extra security, because you're not really giving away your real financial account information. You're giving out a kind of a dummy credit card number. That's like a virtual credit card number. I've talked about those in the show before, and some credit card companies do offer those. But this privacy.com has all sorts of ways that you can tweak these numbers. So basically for each retailer, and a kind of a one-off thing, you could customize for each one of them how much you want them to be able to charge, how often, maybe it's a one-time deal, maybe it's a certain amount a month, or all sorts of different ways you can kind of slice and dice that. And I need to look at it too. The problem that I've had with it, and the reason I haven't talked about it, is because it's tied directly to a bank account. So it kind of works more like a debit card or an ACH transfer or something. I mean, it's a direct pull. And as I will probably, I think, talk about next week, that could be a dangerous relationship. I mean, if that gets compromised, then your money can be taken directly out of your financial institution, your bank account, and it's gone. You have to now get it back. And there are some rules that will, let you contest those things and get some money back even temporarily while you figure things out. But it's a lot harder to get your money back than to just never have to give it up at all, which is why I always recommend using credit cards online instead of debit cards. Because with a credit card, you probably never have to pay that bill. You just contest it, and you'll even well before the bill comes due, which is a much better position to be in. And in fact, like I said, I kind of alluded to, next week I'm going to talk about a credit card situation or a debit card situation I got into next week that was no fault of my own, nevertheless had financial consequences. But what I was thinking, and I actually talked with Craig about this offline, and one way I might approach this, and I might give this a shot, is to create a dedicated bank account for that. Like just create a whole separate account where all I keep in there is enough money to cover these kind of Netflix or some of these kind of known bills maybe that I want to charge this way. And just enough to cover those, and don't tie it to any other account. Don't set up overdraft protection or anything, because you don't want, if something goes wrong, you don't want someone to be able to run that one to zero and then all of a sudden be able to siphon money from other accounts as well. So I may give it a shot and try it that way. But I mean, think about, and maybe this is not the best example, but like gym memberships or some of these other subscriptions where if you want to cut them off, it's a lot easier to do if they're not tied directly to a real credit card, right? If they have a credit card that's kind of virtual and dedicated just for them, then you can cut off that one card whenever you want. And I can guarantee a gym's not going to keep your membership around too long if you stop paying for it. So anyway, you might want to check it out. I'm certainly going to, I think, give it a look. Assuming I can set it up the way I want to, where it's only tied to like a one account that's not tied to anything else, I might give that a shot. One other quick thing I want to circle back on. He talked about the Google Plus trick for creating dummy email addresses. That does work. I've used it in the past. So basically, if you've got an email address like joeschmo@gmail.com, then you can give out joeschmo plus blah, whatever you want. And by literally like the addition sign, the plus sign, and anything after that plus sign will basically be ignored by Google, and it will just act as if you sent that to joeschmo@gmail.com. But, it's got some obvious limitations, right? Any human looking at that will immediately see, oh, well, okay, the real address there is joeschmo@gmail.com. And some websites actually block that. They either don't think that the plus sign is a valid part of a email address, which turns out it is, or they just don't want you to give it a dummy address, so they don't let you do it. But for me, the real way to set that up is to buy yourself a web domain. And for $15 a year, you have basically infinite number of email addresses you can give out. If I own mycooldomain.com, then I can give out blah at mycooldomain.com. I can give out Macy's at mycooldomain.com. I can give out Amazon at mycooldomain.com, and they'll all come to my account. But I could also filter and put in different folders or block any of those email addresses at any time if I wanted to as well. All right, so that's going to wrap it up this week. I did add some little bonus content. I talked to Craig a little bit more about the app and get into a little bit more details about what it does. That will be showing up shortly for my patrons as bonus content. I will have a news show for you next week, and I've got several interviews in the hopper on the way. So, and again, for this week, for those that celebrate it, have a very happy Thanksgiving. Help your friends and family to beef up their security and privacy. Maybe just have some fun chats about privacy and security. work that into the conversation. It would be a great time maybe to mention the book, the podcast, the blog to other people. Word of mouth is really important. It really does mean a lot, and it's very effective. So until next week, have a happy holidays, everybody. Go get those booster shots. Help people get theirs as well. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.